Okay, so today we're going to be talking about, well, the Cold War.
Hmm.
And we're going to be taking a look at it from kind of a unique angle. We have a lot of historical material that
Yes.
we've been going through and kind of picking apart. And I think it's really interesting stuff. And what we really want to get at is why this whole thing happened,
Right.
this global standoff.
Yeah.
And we really want to focus in on this one particular thing that happened because of it that I don't think a lot of people really think about when they're thinking about the Cold War, and that's decolonization.
Decolonization. Yeah, it's a big topic, but we're going to try to really distill it down,
Correct.
give you kind of the core reasons behind it and that connection to the Cold War.
Yeah, so we're not going to go like super deep into the weeds on every single thing that happened in the Cold War,
Sure.
but we're going to give you the broad strokes, the big picture.
Exactly.
And so what we're really going to be talking about is these two main players, you know, the United States and the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
And they had very different ideas about how things should be run
Very different.
in the world, how society should be organized, how government should be organized, all those kinds of things. And that's really what led to this big conflict.
Right. This is this clash of ideologies. I mean,
Yeah.
it was really democratic capitalism versus authoritarian communism.
Right.
And they were so fundamentally opposed that, yeah, it really set the stage for this conflict.
Okay, so let's start with the U.S. then.
Yeah.
What were the main ideas behind their system of democratic capitalism?
Okay, so the U.S., they were all about free markets.
Hmm.
Let the economy do its thing. The government should stay out of it.
Right,
And then also a big emphasis on political participation, having a voice in how the country is run, voting free elections, all that.
right. So like we were saying before, freedom, freedom in the economic realm, freedom in the political realm.
Exactly.
That was like the big idea behind democratic capitalism.
E-
But then you have the Soviet Union
Yeah.
and their whole system of authoritarian communism, which was pretty much the opposite in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, they were much more focused on control. The government controlling the economy, with the idea of making things more equal, redistributing wealth and resources.
Right,
But that came at the expense of individual freedoms and political rights.
right. So in the Soviet Union, it was less about the individual and more about the collective.
Exactly. Yeah, the needs of the state and the good of the whole were prioritized.
Okay, so these are two totally different systems. But here's the thing. Neither of them were content with just practicing their own system in their own backyard.
No, no, they both wanted to see their ideology spread their way of doing things. They
No.
thought it was the best way, and they wanted to see it adopted globally.
Right. So both the U.S. and the USSR had this idea that their system was the ideal model for the entire world, that it was universal.
Exactly. It was this sense of, we have the answer, we have the solution to the world's problems. Everyone should be doing it this way.
Right. And that right there, that clash of visions, is what made things so tense. It wasn't just a disagreement. It was like a battle for the soul of the world in a way.
Yeah, it was a deep ideological struggle, and it wasn't just about, who had the better economic system or the better political system.
Right.
It was about fundamental values, about individual freedom versus collective good.
Yeah, the role of the government in people's lives.
Exactly. And both sides felt very strongly about their position and felt a responsibility to spread it to the rest of the world.
Okay, so this wasn't just something that popped up after World War II. This rivalry, this tension between the U.S. and the USSR had been brewing for a while.
Yeah, the seeds of mistrust were sown even before the war ended. They were allies in fighting the Nazis, but there were already these underlying suspicions and different visions for the future.
Right. So even during the war, when they were on the same side, there were still these cracks starting to show.
Yeah, absolutely. And then after the war, you had these big conferences, Tehran, Bretton Woods, Potsdam, where they were trying to hash out the post-war order.
Right.
And one of the key sticking points was supposed to be free elections in Eastern Europe.
Okay, the idea was that these countries that had been under Nazi occupation would be able to choose their own governments through free and fair elections.
That was the plan.
Yeah.
But Stalin, he had other ideas. He saw the emergence of democratic capitalist states in Eastern Europe as a direct threat to the Soviet Union and to the communist project.
Right. And this goes back to that idea of universalism that we talked about.
Exactly. Stalin believed that communism was the only true path and that any deviation from that path was dangerous.
So for him, having these potentially pro-Western countries right on his border was unacceptable.
Right. It was seen as a security threat and an ideological threat, and so he decided to take action.
And that's where the buffer zone comes in, right?
Exactly. He installed communist governments in these countries, essentially turning them into Soviet satellites.
Okay, so these satellite states were like A protective barrier, a way for Stalin to kind of insulate the Soviet Union from the West.
Right, a buffer zone, a layer of protection against potential capitalist influence.
But of course, the U.S. saw this as a huge betrayal. They saw it as a violation of the agreements they had made about self-determination and democracy.
Yeah, it was a major blow to trust, and it really fueled the growing antagonism between the two superpowers.
And then you have the situation in Germany, which further escalated things.
Yeah, after the war, Germany was divided into four occupation zones, one for each of the main Allied powers, the US, the UK, France, and the Soviet Union.
Right.
But the idea was that this would be a temporary arrangement and that eventually Germany would be reunified.
But Stalin wasn't in any hurry to give up his part of Germany.
No, he saw Eastern Germany as strategically important, and he wasn't going to let go of it, so he held on tight, and it became another Soviet satellite state.
And this division of Germany right down the middle really solidified the split between East and West.
Yeah, it was a powerful symbol of the growing divide, and it became a focal point for a lot of the tension and the mistrust.
And this is where Winston Churchill's famous Iron Curtain speech comes in, right? That image of Europe being divided by this invisible but very real barrier between communist East and capitalist West.
Yeah, that speech really captured the moment it crystallized the sense that the world was being split into two opposing camps.
Okay, so to recap, we've got these two global superpowers, each with their own universal ideology, and they're locked in this struggle for dominance.
Right, and this struggle is fueled by a deep mistrust and a long history of suspicion, and it's playing out on a global stage.
Right, and one of the most significant but often overlooked consequences of this whole Cold War rivalry was its impact on decolonization.
Yeah, as World War II ended, we saw a huge wave of colonies gaining their independence from European powers.
Right, all across Africa, Asia, the Middle East.
Exactly. It was a period of massive change and upheaval in the global order.
And both the U.S. and the USSR saw these newly independent nations as potential prizes in their ideological competition.
Yeah, they both wanted to bring these new countries into their sphere of influence to expand their own power and to limit the influence of the other side.
Right, so these new nations that had just fought so hard for their freedom suddenly found themselves being pressured to choose sides in this Cold War rivalry.
Exactly. It was a difficult position to be in. They had just escaped colonialism and now they were being pulled into this new global conflict.
And it was a conflict that they really had no part in creating.
Right. They were caught in the middle of this superpower struggle and they were being treated like pawns.
But thankfully, not all of them just went along with it. And that's where the non-aligned movement comes in.
Yeah, the non-aligned movement was a really important development. It was a way for these newly independent countries to resist the pressure to choose sides.
Right. They wanted to chart their own course. They wanted to be independent from both the U.S. and the USSR.
Exactly. They wanted to define their own future and not be dictated to by either superpower.
And there were some really key figures who were instrumental in the formation of this movement.
Yeah, people like Ahmed Sukarno, the president of Indonesia, and Kwame Nkrumah, the president of Ghana.
Right. They are real pioneers in advocating for this third way, this non-aligned approach.
Exactly. And they were able to bring together a really diverse group of countries from all over the world.
And one of the first big gatherings of these non-aligned nations was in 1955 in Bandung, Indonesia.
Yeah, that was a landmark event. It brought together 29 heads of state from across Africa and Asia.
So it was a real coming together of the newly independent world.
Absolutely. It was a powerful symbol of their collective desire for autonomy and self-determination.
And this idea of non-alignment, it wasn't just about staying neutral.
Yeah.
It was also about finding ways to leverage the Cold War rivalry to their advantage.
Yeah, they were really smart about it. They knew that the U.S. and the USSR were both eager to win them over.
Right.
And so they were able to play the two sides off against each other to secure aid and resources.
Okay, so it was like a strategic balancing act,
Yeah.
Playing one side off the other to get what they needed.
Exactly. They were using the Cold War to their own benefit to help build their own nations and strengthen their independence.
And one example of this is Indonesia, right?
Yeah, Indonesia is a great example. They were receiving aid from the Soviet Union, but at the same time, they were cracking down on their own domestic communist party.
Right, so they're playing a very complex game, trying to maintain good relations with both sides while also pursuing their own national interests.
Exactly. It was a delicate balancing act, and it shows the kind of strategic thinking that went into the non-aligned movement.
Okay, so to sum it all up, the Cold War, this global ideological battle between the U.S. and the USSR, it had this really significant impact on the world beyond just those two countries.
Absolutely. It shaped the course of decolonization, and it led to the rise of this really important new force in global politics, the non-aligned movement.
Right. And it's interesting to think about how the Cold War created the conditions for the emergence of this movement. The
Mhm.
superpowers' quest for dominance actually ended up empowering these newly independent nations in a way.
Yeah, it's a reminder that even in the midst of conflict and struggle, there can be unexpected opportunities for agency and change.
So thinking about all this, I mean, it really makes you wonder about how these dynamics of global power and influence are playing out in the world today. Are there similar ideological battles happening? Are there new forms of non-alignment emerging?
Yeah, it's a question worth pondering. How do countries navigate the complexities of global power in today's world? And are there lessons we can learn from the past, from the experience of the Cold War and the non-aligned movement?
It's a lot to think about, and I hope this deep dive has given you some new insights into this fascinating and complex period of history.
Yeah, it's a topic that continues to resonate today, and it's important to keep exploring and understanding its legacies.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.